If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. Hey, welcome to tonight's California Haunts Radio. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so, and I've got a great guest coming up. How is everybody today? Well, I hope that means good. I'm good, except my air conditioning's out, and it's 90 degrees in here, and as you can tell by the fuzzy sound behind me, I've got a fan blowing on me. Otherwise, I'd be dying in here. But anyway, it's great to see everybody. I'm glad to be back this week, and we have a great show lined up. My gosh, this woman, the woman that I have scheduled tonight is such a legendary figure in the world of UFOs and alien abductions, in that she has a very famous aunt and uncle that we're going to probably have a talk about tonight. But what I think is really cool is that this is the second time she's been on my show. She may not remember, but back when California Haunts Radio started, we started like everybody else on Blog Talk Radio, and I started out, and there weren't a lot of groups on doing this on Blog Talk Radio at the time. So the first couple of years were really good. There were no big issues as far as, my hair is all messed up. There were no big issues as far as, the quality coming out of Blog Talk. But within a year or so after that, 2 years, I think there were a lot of paranormal groups that got on the air. And so Blog Talk started to have bandwidth issues and whatnot. So like a lot of the radio shows at that time, I went looking for a new place to launch, to have the show, and I found TalkShoe. I don't even know if TalkShoe's around anymore, and we did about a dozen shows on there, and Kathleen came on the show on TalkShoe. So it's California Haunts Radio 2 at TalkShoe. So I'm really excited to have her on. It was a long time ago, but we're going to have a lot to talk about tonight. So if you guys have any questions, just a reminder, if you guys have any questions and you're in the chat room, feel free to ask, because we're going to talk about UFOs and alien abduction tonight. Here we go. Hello.
Hello. Nice to see you again.
Nice. It's been a long time.
Yes, it has. How many years do you think?
Oh my God, like at least 8 or 9 years.
Wow.
I was over at TalkShoe at the time, and TalkShoe was just brand new and hardly had any listeners and whatnot, but you graciously came on to talk to me.
Well, I have been really busy in the past 8 or 9 years.
Well, I'm glad you're back, because let's find out about that. Let's talk about it.
Okay. Well, 10 years ago, I took on the job of the Mutual UFO Network's Director of Experiencer Research. And at that time, it was a little tiny group. There were only, I think, 3 of us. And as it just grew and grew and grew. Now there are 45 caring, compassionate individuals who speak with experiencers who are just seeking help, or someone that will listen to their story without ridicule, without being judgmental. These are kind, compassionate people. And we also have a team of 5 mental health professionals, 2 are psychiatrists, and 3 are psychotherapists who are consultants to our team. They don't work with the people that call in. But if anybody who is listening tonight wants to take part in that service, they can go to MUFON.com, MUFON.com, scroll down to the Experiencer Resource Team. It's not, they just changed the name from research to resource. I'm a researcher, but that's it changed to resource because that's what the people on the team are doing. And you will click on that and you'll come up with a picture of all the members of the team. You can read about everybody's biographical information if you want. At the top of that page, it says complete the Experiencer questionnaire. Very easy. It's only 30 yes and no questions, true and false, whatever. And your score doesn't matter. You can have 20 points out of 30 and be a longtime experiencer with all of the characteristics that experiencers have, or you can have only 10 points and still be an experiencer, but not be taken as many times. So I want to tell people that because a lot of people go to the site and they take that questionnaire and I don't know what they do, but they don't follow through. Now, I have recently stepped down as the director of that team. But so Gwen Farrell is now the director. She is a long-term individual who works with experiencers. She was a hypnotherapist. So she has quite a background. She's an author. She's written books on the topic. And Dr. George Medich is the assistant director. And then Denise Stoner was my personal assistant on the team, and she is my co-author on the alien abduction files. And she's also a long-term experiencer dating back to early childhood. So you have a lot of people on the team who are experiencers or hypnotherapists or know a lot about this topic. The reason I stepped down is due to time constraints. I'm extraordinarily busy. I just, it was stressing me out. And so I decided that I had to step down, and now I'm just a consultant to the team, which is also an important position to have, but it doesn't require really any input from me on a regular basis.
So you've been doing this for a long time, because I know the last time we talked, you were almost just starting to get out there, talking about your aunt and uncle, and now, God, you've written all these books. It's just crazy.
Yes, well, I began my research 30 years ago. I was 13 when Betty and Barney had their experience, but I went on and just a normal kid, had went through high school. I was on the student council and went on to college and studied social work. And I wanted to go into psychiatric social work. But when my first husband was earning his doctorate in the philosophy of psychiatry in Cincinnati. And so I ended up going into the field of education. Instead of social work, and worked in the inner city and did graduate work there, and continued it when I moved back to New Hampshire. I lived in Colorado for several years too. So that's sort of where I was coming from then. But when I was back in New Hampshire teaching school, I had 5 children too. 2 of my own, 3 of my husband's. And so I was divorced from the first one. And I became ill, and with chronic fatigue and immune dysfunction syndrome. And I had been accustomed to really being in there as a researcher in education and holding important positions. And being at home and sick and alone was boring as could be. So I thought, what can I do? And I thought, well, I've always wanted to be a writer. In fact, I was studying that in college until my Aunt Betty Hill said to me, "Do something practical, Kathy." Be a social worker. It's she loved being a social worker. That's what she did for work. And so I did that, and it just didn't pan out for me. But she said, okay, then you can begin very slowly. And, when I felt well enough,
Right.
researching and investigating what the experience that she and my uncle had. And so I did that for the next 14 years, slowly going through all of her archival records, interviews, many, many interviews with her, interviews with the researchers, the investigators who were alive. My husband and I went up along the route time after time after time, and I did with Betty as well, through northern New Hampshire and Franconia Notch, where Betty and Barney had their close encounter with a UFO. So my goodness, it's been a long process. Captured was published in 2007. And I asked Stanton Friedman to join me in that because he was so instrumental in finding scientists who would vet Marjorie Fish's work on the star map that Betty saw on the craft and then sketched as the result of post-hypnotic suggestion by neuropsychiatrist Dr. Benjamin Simon, who was the doctor who saw Betty and Barney separately for a period of 6 months. It was more like 3 months or 4 months separately, and then 2 months where they were together, listening to what each other said under hypnosis. And they told essentially the same story. So that was really important, but it had such a huge impact on me and also on my family that I always wanted to know precisely what did happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent years searching for information and even went to the archival collections of some of the disinformants to see what made them tick and why they were causing so many problems for my aunt.
Well,
So that's in a little longer than a nutshell, I guess.
well, let's talk about them. Let's talk about their character because I mean, your aunt and uncle were not flaky people. In fact,
No.
your uncle, from reading what I've read on the topic, he was the postal worker. He was very meticulous about stuff, and he even tried to debunk it.
He did. I mean, Barney had an IQ of 140, and he was a confirmed skeptic when it came to flying saucers, is what they called them in those days. He didn't think it was possible. And he and my aunt were very active in the community in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Barney was born in Virginia and then lived in Philadelphia and met Betty when he was on vacation at Hampton Beach in New Hampshire. And she was down at the beach, and she had an apartment house where she would do short-term rentals. So she said, well, if you come up again to go to the beach, I'll rent an apartment to you. And they ended up becoming close friends and never thought that they would marry, but they had so many interests in common because Betty was a civil rights advocate as well. And they ended up falling in love. They got married in 1960, and they had this experience in September of 1961. And by the time that it was released to the public, they never wanted it to go public. Let me put it this way. They had too much to lose. In 1965, because of their political activities, Betty and Barney were invited to Lyndon Johnson's inauguration. And because I was their good niece and they were role models for me. I was invited as well. It was a wonderful experience. And then in 1965, Barney was appointed to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights as a state advisory member from New Hampshire. He was given an award by Sergeant Shriver, who was the head of the U.S. Poverty Program, for the good work that my uncle and aunt did with through the Office of Economic Opportunity to set up the Rockingham County Community Action Program. And Barney was the first chairman of the board of directors on that. They worked on a literacy program that Barney set up through the Archdiocese, because in those days you had to pass a literacy test in order to vote. So they were very actively involved in the state and in their work for the betterment of humanity. When a newspaper reporter was given the information on what happened to Betty and Barney, and then talked to Pease Air Force Base, talked to people up in the White Mountains, actually found 12 to 14 witnesses to the craft that night, and released the story 5 days in the Boston Traveler. So you might say Betty and Barney went from being highly respected, credible individuals to a couple of lunatics overnight in the eyes of many people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was just so sad. It was so sad to see that happen.
The night it happened, they were driving. They'd gone for a trip, right? And then
Yes.
they were on their way home.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were going over the mountains to head home. Then what happened? According to what they say.
Well, they entered northern New Hampshire from Canada and stopped in Colebrook, had a snack left there at 10 o'clock, and headed south to Lancaster. And about 4 miles south of Lancaster, there was a new light in the sky. And the strange thing about it was that it shot upward rather than like a shooting star in an arc. So Betty started watching it, wondering what it was. And they continued driving south. It was a light, bright night. The moon was about 3/4 full. And it started to come in closer and closer and closer. And finally, when they were just north of Franconia Notch, and Franconia Notch is a beautiful tourist area with mountains on each side of the road. There's a ski area there, the Cannon Mountain ski area. Was the Old Man of the Mountain, and it's just a great tourist spot for people to go to. And so they were like 4 miles north of Franconia Notch when Betty said to Barney, pull over and stop the car. I want to look at this thing through binoculars, and I want to walk the dog. They had their little dachshund Delcy with them. So Barney pulled over, and they got the binoculars. Barney was going to walk the dog near the woods, so he got his gun from the trunk, and he wanted to have that so that if a bear came out of the woods, he could fire a warning shot. And so the craft came in very close, and it was obviously at that point not a conventional aircraft, although Barney was in denial. He knew deep down that this was something unusual. And so they got back into the car. They entered Franconia Notch. The first thing they saw was Cannon Mountain straight ahead. And then beyond that is the Old Man of the Mountain. The old man's profile was 48 feet from forehead to chin. And they saw the craft hovering next to the old man's profile. And the craft was at least 1.5 to 2 times the length of the old man's profile.
Wow.
So it was very large. It appeared to be rotating, and it was lighted on only one side. So they watched that, and then Barney was watching it as it started moving. And it moved like a yo-yo, he called it. I think today of the ping pong ball that the tic tac
Mm-hmm.
on the having to do with the Nimitz, that the tic tac bounced back and forth over the ocean like a ping pong ball.
Right.
And from Barney's description, it sounds like the flight pattern was the same. It also ascended vertically and descended vertically, flew in erratically. And so they got back into the car. Barney was saying, "Oh, I want to get home." And so they exited Franconia Notch, the south entrance. And this is where the tourist attractions are. Today, if you go there, you showed the historical marker that the state erected on Betty and Barney, and you'll find that on Route 3 in front of the Indian Head Resort. That was a good place for it because there's a parking lot there. People can pull over to the side of the road or park in the parking lot and go to the marker. So they were south of the Indian Head Resort, about a mile south, when Betty was becoming excited. And she rarely became excited, but she's excited. "Barney, you have to pull over. It's coming in close. It's coming in close." And before he could find a place to pull over, the craft hovered right over the highway, right over Route 3. And Barney had to pull the car into the middle of the road in order not to be directly underneath it. Do you know what's happened to people who have tried to drive under it? Under the craft doing this? I've worked on some investigations where this happened, and the car ended up going up into the craft when it tried to drive under.
I've never heard of that. That's fascinating.
Yes. So Barney stopped the car. He got out of the car, had his binoculars, and he's looking up at the craft. Betty's looking from the passenger seat. And Barney steps back, and when he did, the craft moved to the opposite side of the road. And Barney followed it to the side of the road, looking at it with binoculars, trying to identify what this was. He said it looked like a giant pancake just hanging there in the air, and it was silent. But he didn't want it to be anything unusual. He was trying to convince himself, it has to be a helicopter or something. Yeah,
wanted to be,
a silent
helicopter. No.
A silent helicopter. So Barney's looking up at this craft. It's now hovering 100 feet overhead and about 50 feet in the distance. And he observes 9 to 11 figures looking down at him. They're dressed in black, shiny uniforms. All of a sudden, all but one turn and walk to what appears to be a panel. Their arms go up. He can see them from the tops of their heads down to their knees at this point. And one looks over his shoulder down at Barney, and little fin-like structures start to slide out with little red lights, and something starts to drop down out of the bottom of the craft. Now, Barney was wondering, could it be a rope or could it be a ladder? It wasn't either of those things. We know what that is today. That is the carrier beam that takes people to the craft. And at that time, Barney was looking at the face of the one who was standing in the window, staring down at him. And Barney thought that there was a plan, and that plan was to capture him, quote, like a bug in a net, close quote. So Barney went screaming back to the car to Betty that they had to get out of there or they were going to be captured. As he was entering the car, he saw that the craft was now moving in his direction. So he's speeding down the highway, and he says to Betty, "Roll down your window and look up and see if you can see it." She was expecting to see the lights. All she saw was blackness, even though it was a bright light night. And she later realized that the craft was right over the top of the car. So they went only a few blocks, maybe 5 or 6 blocks, when Betty and Barney heard a series of code-like buzzing sounds striking the trunk of the car. And this tingling sensation passed through their bodies, and they went into an altered state of consciousness when that occurred. They found themselves, as if only a moment had passed, 35 miles down the highway. They heard a second series of buzzing sounds that returned them to full consciousness, and they had vague memories of observing a fiery orb sitting on the ground, of being on a dirt road with tall trees all around, and of a roadblock, figures standing in the road, but they didn't know where or when that occurred.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so lots of questions, lots of mysteries. Betty did ask the question, well, Barney, now do you believe in flying saucers? And he said, Betty, don't be ridiculous. And Betty thought that he was probably kidding her. But he said, I'll prove to you that I can make that sound. And so he stopped the car, he drove it from one side of the road to the other, and he could not reproduce that sound. And they just drove home from there, and it was, probably about an hour, maybe hour and a half drive from there to their house. And when they arrived home, they found many strange things that they couldn't account for. Barney got out of the car, he went into the bathroom, and his best dress shoes were so deeply scraped along the toes that he had to buy new shoes. He was a meticulous dresser. Betty went to take off her dress, and the zipper was torn. There was in the thick zipper fabric torn along the stitching. The lining was torn from waist to hemline, and the hem was down on one side. It had been in perfect condition when she'd put it on earlier the previous day, but so many mysteries. And the binocular strap that Barney had around his neck was broken. The watches that they had been wearing that they checked at 10 o'clock, and then Betty checked again at 11:15 before the craft came down over the highway. Those watches had stopped running and never ran again. And so Betty called my mother.
Mm-hmm.
They did sleep. They did draw sketches of what they saw, went to separate rooms so they wouldn't cheat. And Betty called my mother. I had arrived home from school for the day, and my mother sounded concerned and was talking about how she would call our neighbor who was a physicist and would get back to Betty. So my mother did call him, and he told my mother for some reason that if Betty had a compass, she should take it out to the car and see how the needle reacted. I mean, Betty was fearful of radiation, but a compass will not measure radiation.
Mm-hmm.
So it measures a magnetic field. So apparently that physicist knew more than the rest of us about UFOs. And Betty did find a compass. Barney was very upset with her. He said, Betty, no good can come of talking to anyone about this. Don't tell a soul. And that's when Betty went to the phone and called my mother. So, irritating Barney even more. And then Betty went out to the car and placed the compass on the side of the car, and it was fine. It behaved like a compass. And then she saw new spots, shiny spots on the trunk of the car that hadn't been there the previous day.
Mm-hmm.
And she held the compass over those, and the needle would spin and spin. And she thought, well, maybe her hands were shaking. Maybe she was doing it. So she put the compass directly on the metal and let go. And the needle still whirled and whirled. So there was a very strong magnetic field there. And finally, the neighbors went down and saw this. And finally, Barney was shamed into going out and taking a look too. He tried it. It did the same thing for him. And then he said, "Oh, Betty, it's only a cheap compass. Come on into the house." So he tried and tried to forget about this, but Betty wouldn't let him. My mother called Betty and told her and Barney to make a report to Pease Air Force Base. That came from a police officer. He'd been the chief of police in the small town of Newton, New Hampshire, and was my father's best friend. He stopped by for coffee every night, so he passed that information to my mother. And so Betty and Barney called Pease and made a report. And the story goes on from there. So many questions. There were 2 radar reports that night, one at Pease and one at the North Concord, Vermont radar station. And there were witnesses to the craft. We didn't know that for years. I just found out after John Luttrell died. And John Luttrell was the newspaper reporter who broke the story, violated confidentiality. Well, he didn't, but someone else did. And
I've never heard of that there were witnesses. That's new to me too.
That is new. That's new information that I'm releasing. There's a lot of new information in the updated 60-year anniversary edition of Captured. Mm-hmm. And I did not stop my investigation when the first book was written. I went on looking for scientists who were interested in evaluating Betty's dress and the evidence on the dress and any other evidence that they might be interested in. And there have been some astounding findings that are in the new book, and more information about those witnesses who saw the craft as well.
Oh my God, I'm going to have to get this book. My question with this is that now I understand it was in your first book too that there were round circles on the back of the car.
Yes, on the trunk of the car, just concentric circles that were highly polished. They were the same color as the metal of the car, but they were highly polished. They hadn't been there the day before. And but that is the area of the car where the craft was causing the buzzing sounds when it was striking the metal on the trunk of the car.
I just wonder if it wasn't something like radar, because I mean, with the current radar that we use, even on the submarines, it has to ping against an object and come back. So maybe that was their version of of a radar system that would go down and hit the car and then would come back up so they could locate it.
Oh, that's an interesting hypothesis. But also the military thought that perhaps it was something like sonar. That's
right.
Yeah, that's what they said.
I meant sonar. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what I meant with sonar.
Yeah. So there were many Air Force officers and Navy officers who were interested in Betty's and Barney's case, and also scientists who investigated it. And it was the first scientifically investigated case of alien abduction in the United States. So
when did they finally, after this happened, here's a question I have too, because some of these cases, like the abduction in the Mojave, that one terrified the heck out of me. The couple that was camping back out there.
Yes, I read that book.
that one gave me nightmares. And did they have any nightmares or any after effects or anything after this abduction?
Betty had 5 dreams. Part of it was like nightmares, and 5 only. They began 10 days after the experience, and they went for 5 days. And she had these just before she woke up in the morning. And Barney was working on the graveyard shift at the Boston Post Office then, so he wasn't home when she was having these. But she dreamed of things that she remembered, which is, when you're just waking up in the morning, you're kind of in a hypnotic state. And you can have these kind of dreams which have real information, things that you remember, but then you have things that can be a little distorted too. And especially if you're experiencing anxiety over something that occurred. So Betty turned in her dreams the gray-skinned, completely hairless, short entities. A lot of them were 3.5 to 4 feet tall, and then the ones who were the examiner and the leader, which she called him, they were about 5 to 5.5 feet tall. So she turned those in her dreams into men who had black hair, human faces, ears, looked human in just about every way. They were wearing blue cadet hats and blue cadet uniforms. And so completely different in that part in terms of what they looked like, as opposed to what she remembered in hypnosis.
Interesting. And there were no revisits, right? Because like with the Mojave one, that's what terrified me about that one. They're laying in bed and they see them come to the walls.
Well, yeah, there were additional visits, but Betty never wanted to tell anyone because she feared ridicule. And ridicule, she wanted just to go on with her life. So did Barney. They were committed to politics and the civil rights movement and that sort of thing. And so this was just something that was an interference in their life. It distressed Barney greatly. He ended up developing bleeding ulcers. He was in the hospital. He had to take a 3-month leave of absence from work. And that's how he ended up with Dr. Benjamin Simon, because he had developed a type of hypnosis that really gets to the crux of the matter. And it's a deep level of hypnosis, and it's hypnoanalysis. And so he used that on Barney to help him to recover and to move on through his memories of what had occurred. Go ahead.
So they didn't know, there's a question in the chat room, that at this point, after coming home, they had no idea how much time had elapsed between when the beings approached them and then when they found themselves back in the car, right?
Yeah, well, it wasn't that the beings approached them. Barney's last memory was observing the beings on the craft looking down at him, but the craft was in the air. Okay, so when they arrived home, they looked at the clock. They set their watches. They knew they were supposed to be home between 2 and 3 in the afternoon. It was now 5:15. And I know that because I have Betty's watch. And it still said at 5:15, as she said it. She didn't realize, nor did Barney, that their watches would never run again. But they didn't.
Wow. Something magnetic got that.
So they knew they were arrived home later than they should have, but they were more focused on their memories of the craft and the questions about their clothing and all of these other things. It wasn't for a couple of months when Robert Homan and C.D. Jackson, who were a couple of scientists from IBM, sat down with them. They were also members of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, and went over that trip. And well, why did it take them all that time, 2 hours, to drive 35 miles? That's yeah.
Wow, that's a long time.
So that really put some fear into Barney, I think. Betty was always more comfortable with this than Barney. I wouldn't be surprised if she had been taken before, because I've worked on 3 major research studies with about 5,000 experiencers, and we had PhD scientists working with us on these, on 2 of them. And what we discovered is that it's generational, and that the vast majority of experiencers are taken for the first time when they're less than 20 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. And a lot when they're less than 5, about 37%.
Yeah, but could that be because, well, especially when they're young like that, that maybe, and I hate to say it this way, but maybe those young children are the hybrids. We don't know it.
Well, some children, I believe, are hybrids and born to Earth Mother and Earth Father, but they were created on the craft, and there was genetic manipulation, and they have very special characteristics. Now they're very kind and gentle kids. They can do things like telekinesis. Some of them talk in what they call a star language. Some of them are healers. They're incredible kids, but so no one should be afraid of them, because they've just been tweaked. And these ETs have told many experiencers that they are trying to create a more sustainable human, and also a more sustainable species of their own. And so that's sort of the process that they're using to upgrade the human genome, so that we will overcome the things that could cause us to destroy our planet, such as our warlike behavior.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Now, you talk about them going under hypnosis. When did that happen? When they started to have the regressions done?
The regressions waited until, their first consultation with Dr. Simon was in December of 1963. They had wanted to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist who used hypnosis before that, and they did see someone, but he said that he didn't want to hypnotize them because they would remember more over time. But then Barney had this medical problem, and so they went to Dr. Simon. He interviewed them, conditioned them to go into deep trance hypnosis under rapid induction, just to say a word, and they would go into hypnosis. He took them separately, and the hypnosis began for Barney in February of 1964, and it began for Betty 2 weeks later. He took Barney for the first 2 sessions because Barney was the real patient. He was the one who needed help. But Betty wanted to know what happened as well, so he took her separately. And he reinstated amnesia at the end of each session, so they couldn't share information. Then, so he saw them in hypnosis for, I have 10 or 11 hypnosis tapes. And then he took them together, and he did therapy with them as they listened to what one another said in hypnosis. And he let them remember as well what they had remembered. Yeah.
Didn't Barney's recollection was slightly different than Betty's?
Well, what I find is that Barney's speech patterns were different than Betty's. Betty was an individual who was very descriptive in her details. And she remembered, she talked a lot more than Barney. Remember, Barney was a Black man being raised in the South under a system of apartheid. And in that system, he had to be very careful about what he said. And I think that probably is part of the reason, at least, why he always thought about what he was going to say and what the impact would be. So he and Betty underwent the same exams Not all of Barney's exam was put into the first book that was written.
Mm-hmm.
But the way it really happened on the hypnosis tapes is in the book that Stanton Friedman and I wrote, Captured. So Betty was far more descriptive. Barney had the same kinds of things done to him that Betty had, but he spoke with few words.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a matter of personality difference, I think, and maybe brain functioning.
Well, if I remember the original movie about it, with
Mm-hmm.
James Earl Jones,
Mm-hmm.
man, Barney got a real macho guy to play him. That's pretty cool. James Earl Jones. You can't ask for better than that.
Right. Yes.
Simba's dad. Um, what terrified me was Betty's pregnancy. I don't know how much of that movie was close to your book or true, you know. But the pregnancy test they showed in there was absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. And in that movie starring James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons, you did not get the full picture of what occurred. They did this for the public because they didn't want to cause public hysteria. They wanted to leave people doubting that it happened. So in that movie, it seemed like they just saw this light in the sky, and then Betty had these dreams. And there was so much more that they remembered. And it was in the early reports, the investigative reports, the Air Force report. And so in that movie, James Earl Jones played a good Barney. Barney died in 1969 at age 46 from a massive cerebral hemorrhage. So he never lived to see this movie, but Betty did. Estelle Parsons didn't capture Betty's personality. Betty had a very, very good self-esteem. Betty was highly intelligent, and Betty was not a whiner like the Betty in that movie. I just thought she played this homely little 60s housewife type. That's not Betty at all. And but I have to say, I thought it was a good movie, despite the fact that it wasn't accurate.
Right. How did they communicate? I mean, it must have been. I mean, the aliens did not speak English, or maybe they did. I don't know. How did that communication go so that Betty and Barney knew what was going on or what was going to happen or whatever?
Betty and Barney understood them in English, and what they said is that they would hear this like mumming sound, and they would then understand it in English. And it was telepathic communication. Maybe there was a little that, I don't know what kind of, I can't even make that sound, but maybe there was a little of that. I think I heard that sound when I was taking care of Betty when she was dying from cancer. She was under hospice care, and I stayed with her. And I had in my bedroom a monitor so I could hear what was going on in her bedroom. And one night I heard this kind of a zipping sound I've never heard before, as far as I recall. And Betty said, "My God, I never thought I'd see you again."
Oh boy.
So I kind of think that maybe she was seeing the nice entity who was the leader, who took away her pain when she had that needle in the navel. And coincidentally, I just want to make the point that amniocentesis was not being used in hospitals when Betty had her hypnosis sessions and remembered that occurring. It was several years later before it was being used in a hospital setting.
See, what we're talking about is it showed it in the movie that she underwent a pregnancy test. And what they did was they took a large needle and inserted it in through her navel, and it was painful for her at the time. And yeah, that's what I found terrifying. That was a big needle going into the navel. And I understand that he actually, that your uncle actually felt something that they had done something with his male parts, correct?
Yes, they did take a sperm sample from him.
Okay. Interesting. It's interesting.
Well, they had a program going. They had to have had a program. I have investigated cases that went back into the 1950s. In Denise Stoner's case that I wrote about, and she wrote about in the alien abduction files, Denise's mother had been taken when she was a girl, and Denise is now 72 years old. So this goes back in time, but it was never investigated. And Denise was taken, she believes, for the first time when she was about 2.5 years old. And so it's been going on a long time. They've had time to establish these programs for the hybridization. Among other things that they're doing on this planet. They've collected flora and fauna dating back to the mid-1950s.
Wow.
And the way they explain it to experiencers, the older experiencers are now able to communicate with them and receive information from them. And they say that they're doing this for 2 reasons. One reason is that we have reached a stage in our development where our technological development is out of sync with our spiritual growth. And when you have this kind of thing occurring, you can destroy your planet and life on your planet. So I think of Noah's Ark when I think of what they say that they're doing. They've also told some people that they are seeding other planets, that they're terraforming and seeding planets as well.
That makes kind of sense when you say that about the plants and stuff, because going back to that abduction of the Mojave, if you remember the story, that's what they saw. That they saw these beams coming out of the ships. The multiple ships they saw, he thought they were mining, because it reminded him of like dredgers of stuff coming down. So that makes a lot of sense. Man, I gotta get caught up on my research. I haven't been really looking into this stuff lately.
Well, some of the groups also do mine things like rare earths. So some of these groups are doing mining projects as well.
Interesting. Yeah. So when she's aboard the ship, how did she describe the inside of the ship?
There was a hallway that encircled the craft, and then they only saw 2 examining rooms. Betty saw hers and Barney saw his, but they were wedge-shaped with the end cut off, so it was like kind of circular, like it had a circular center. That's probably where the control center is. That's where Denise went. They took her to the center of the craft, and there was intelligence there in the center of the craft for Denise. Betty and Barney were not taken there, but and Denise was given information by this entity, like a telepathic information, that she was feeling sorry that this consciousness was encased in this kind of machine, in a sense. She said it looked almost like a lotus flower, the way it was constructed. And the entity said to her, "Don't be afraid. It's okay. Don't feel sorry for me. I volunteer to do this, and I can come out when I want to." And yeah.
Wow.
And so that might have been what was in the center section of the craft Betty and Barney were on. There were no light fixtures. You just could see blue light radiating out through the walls. The hallway was dark.
Wow.
There was a guard stationed at the door. One of those little short ones.
And probably an examination table, right?
There was an examination table, and in Betty's room, there was a chaise lounge kind of thing too, almost like a really modern dentist chair in a sense. Yeah. And so she was on that first, where they examined her skin. They took samples from her fingernails, scraped her skin, looked at it through what was like a very large microscope thing, or probably more like a magnifying glass, just that round thing, part of it. Took samples of her hair, from her nose, her mouth, her ears, that sort of thing. Examined, very interested in Betty's and Barney's skeletal structure, muscular structure, and nervous systems. They worked on those.
I wonder why they separated them, though. Maybe to cut down on any problems with them teaming up or something, or was it just a kid? You think it was a case that because he was male, they wanted a separate doctor to look at him versus her?
They had only one examiner on the craft, so maybe they could contain Barney better, having him in a separate room with these entities around him, so that he wouldn't escape. And so the examiner was in doing what he needed to do, or she needed to do, with Betty. And then when they finished, went in to examine Barney. And then Betty had put her dress back on, and she saw what she called a book. It's not like we think of a book. It's more like a tablet. And she opened it up, and embedded in it were symbols. There were rows of vertically symbols, and she'd never seen symbols like that. And she was left alone in the room with the leader, and she had lost her fear of him. And she said, "I know you're not from around here. Where's your home port?" And so that's when he produced this 3-dimensional star map. In Betty's dreams, she dreamed about that star map, but it pulled down like a window shade in her dreams. Everything in her dreams was 1961 technology, but not under hypnosis. It was different. So he produced this like 3-dimensional star map with stars that were connected by solid lines, and others that were connected by dotted lines. Solid lines represented trade routes. Dotted lines represented expeditions. There were some that didn't have lines connecting them. And that's where the brilliant woman, Marjorie Fish, came in. And that map was published in the first book that was written about Betty and Barney. They agreed to do that after their confidentiality was violated. And Marjorie worked for years trying to identify that star system. She thought she'd find many matches. In the end, she found only one after 4 years. She'd built 14 3-dimensional models. She'd had to do all the math to know precisely where to put every one of those stars, which were represented in different colors and different sizes on monofilament line. She had gotten all of the distance data and all of the characteristics of the stars at the university. She had to sit and hand copy all of it. It was an extraordinary effort. In one of her star models, she had 256 stars in their proper location. And what she did is she took the sun and she went out 54 light years in all directions. And finally, there was a new catalog released There was different distance data. We'd made technological progress, and so she used that data, and that is how she found a match for Betty's star map.
Wow. You mentioned earlier that the alien had taken away Betty's pain. What was the pain from?
From the needle in her navel.
Okay.
She said, "Don't do it. Don't do it. It will hurt." And the examiner said, "It won't hurt. Don't worry." And she said, "No." And he plunged it into her navel and caused excruciating pain. It was awful. They didn't know. They should have known. The one thing that makes me very angry about them is that they cause pain before they take that pain away. They don't have to do that. They should be able to anticipate that certain things will be painful.
Well, and then you wonder how many people they did that they've done this to. You know, to know for a fact that that's going to cause pain.
They've done that to a lot of people.
Exactly.
Yes, millions of people probably.
Exactly. Now she ended up. They had promised her to take home some type of book, right?
Yes. Yeah. He promised her that she could take it, but then, as she and Barney were being escorted from the craft, they took the book away from her. That little one who was the guard in the window, in the doorway, that she was so frightened of, was very distressed. That's what the little ones do. Those little ones, they may not even be sentient beings. I'm not certain about that. But they are the guards. They're the assistants. They make sure you don't get off the craft with anything that belongs to them. And so he took it away. And they took Barney down to the car first, which was different from Betty's dream. And then Betty gave up the fight, and the leader escorted her down and apologized and, said, I know you were greatly frightened at first, and sorry for frightening you. And so Betty said to him, "Well, do you think you could come back? Because I know scientists, I know other people who have a lot more knowledge than I do, and I could arrange for them to meet with you." And the leader said, "Well, I don't know if I can do that or not. Maybe I can, but it's not my decision to make." And so Betty said, "Well, how will you find me? And out of all of the millions of people on this planet, how will you find me?" And he said to her, "Don't worry, we always find those that we're looking for." So that makes me wonder, were they looking for Betty that night? But instead of going to her home in Portsmouth and taking her through a wall or a window, they found her up in the White Mountains and took her then. And did she have an implant?
That was the question that was in the chat room I was going to just ask about the possibility of her having an implant. Obviously, they like you say, they probably found her when she was younger. They found her again, and they found her again and again and again.
Yes. So I feel certain that she had an implant, but she would not permit anyone to look for it or remove it. Even when she died, that was a question. Could they look for the implant? And she said no. So
you know what? Maybe it was a case of, okay, I know it's there. I just don't want to think about it being there. Maybe it was one of those cases.
Could have been.
Do you have a little extra time? I'd like to talk to you some more. Is that okay?
Yes, I have a little extra time.
Okay, cool. Because it's just so fascinating, and I have questions out in the audience.
Okay, let's ask the questions, and I'll answer them.
Let me blow this up because I'm blind. So okay. Here's a question from Trisha. Does she also think that since Barney had a different and already clear path for his future as a male, this is a good one, given that it's the late 50s, early 60s, that his less free mind as a black male in the free world was far less inclined to want this information, out there in the public eye? Or did she, as intelligent as her niece says she was, consider the thoughts? she was obviously a free will, lively, thinking person.
She was absolutely a free will thinking person. She didn't care what people thought of her. She knew what was right. As in terms of Barney, he was a man who was very concerned about being proper, doing everything right, being respected in the community. So he had a different personality than Betty.
Cool, very interesting. And Pat, who came in late, did ask if there were reoccurrences of this, which there were, where she had revisiting. Did he have any cases that through hypnosis of them coming back for him?
Well, no, not in hypnosis, but my mother told me that she thought he had been taken again from the family farm, because there were craft that landed on my grandparents' farm. Mm-hmm. I grew up across the street. There were witnesses to one craft that landed 200 feet from my childhood home. And so Barney did not want to hear Betty talking about UFOs and about what happened to them. So right. He had a habit when they visited of walking on the backlands of the family farm. And my mother said that the family was looking for Barney because he didn't come back, and he'd always come back at after an hour or so, whatever it was, and that a craft was seen. And so my mother wondered if maybe that craft took Barney. My mother went down back looking for Barney, and she's the one who saw the craft.
That's interesting. Guys, if you've never read the book Captured, it's a fabulous book. It's a great read, and there's a lot of information in there about what happened to this couple. And Barney, working at the post office, my dad was a mail carrier. And, I could see how he would have the attitude he had, that, he's trying to investigate and debunk it and figure out what actually happened, and maybe not want someone in the back of his head not wanting to believe it. But it's a very fascinating book.
Thank
you. You've written, you've put improvements, not improvements, but extra information in updating the book. Are there any films or anything on the horizon on this that you're going to be involved in?
I hope so. Bryce Zabel, who is a Hollywood producer, has purchased the motion picture rights, documentary rights to film or series, whatever. And we're hoping that he is going to have like an 8-part series, but that's still up in the air. And the only money, the last time I spoke with Bryce, the only money that was available was money for horror shows. And we certainly do not want to turn What Happened to Betty and Barney into a horror show or horror movie.
That's
because
true.
It wasn't that way. Now, Dr. Simon said to Barney in hypnosis, "Do you think that you were kidnapped?" And Barney said, "No, I wasn't kidnapped, because when I think of kidnapping, I think of a person being harmed, and I wasn't harmed."
Mm-hmm. Now, I got to thinking about the scuffs on the shoes. Those were on the front of the shoes, right? So it's almost like maybe it didn't register with him. It's almost like he was pulled forward.
Yeah, we know you'll find out in the book.
Okay.
But Barney, when he was taken from the car, felt like he was floating, and only the toes of his shoes were bumping along the rocks.
That makes sense to me. It makes perfect sense.
There is an explanation in the book of how Betty, how her dress was torn as well. Yes.
Right on. So you guys are going to have to get this book. And I've got a nice picture of you and Betty when she's older. There we go.
Oh, yes, and I'm younger. Yes, that was about a year before Betty died. She died in 2004 from lung cancer. And we were at a MUFON meeting in Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
That's fabulous. Bless her soul. Bless her
Mhm.
for going through this. You know what? I want
Yes.
to thank you. This has been fabulous, and I'd like
Oh,
to have
thank
you.
you.
If you're willing to come on again, I would love to have you on again because I'm so fascinated talking to you because I really like to talk on the next show. Let's talk about other abductions and stuff. You know, we
Sure.
can go into that part. Um,
Absolutely.
Betty and
I would
Barney are
love to.
important because of who they are when it happened, and it's the anniversary. And
Hmm.
I know you must hear all the time, get questions all the time about them, and it should be that way.
Hmm.
But I also think you have all this knowledge about abductions and stuff, and I would love to have you on to talk about the different cases that are out there,
Okay.
if that
Sure.
works. Okay.
Sure. I've written 2 books on abduction. One is the alien abduction files that I mentioned, and the next
Mm-hmm.
one is extraterrestrial contact, what to do when you've been abducted. And in both books, I've talked about many cases.
So I would love to do that if that's okay with you.
Hmm.
Maybe get you on next month because we're full up this month, but I would love to get you on if you have time.
Yeah, I'm full up this month too. So,
Okay.
but I do have some openings next month.
All
Hmm.
right. Well, let me email you when we get done. Thank
Okay.
you so much, Kathleen. I appreciate it. And I
My
know my
pleasure.
listeners did. I tried to cover all your
Thank you.
questions out there, you guys, as best I could. But
Mhm.
for those of you that came in late, check the beginning of the show because there's some really cool information about reoccurrences that Betty experienced and stuff. But fantastic. Thank you, Kathleen. I appreciate it so
Thank you.
much. And we will definitely set up something for next month to talk about some of the other info you have because I mean this is terrific.
Okay. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
you have a
Take
good
care.
evening. You
You
too.
too.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.
Wow, that's all I can say about this show. So yeah, I'm definitely going to try and get her back on next month to talk about the other the other stuff that she's done research on. Anyhow, I got news for you guys, and one of the news is that, as you can see, we're taking donations because I support all this myself, and it gets expensive after a while. But I did start a Patreon, and if you guys want to look us up on Patreon, just go over to Patreon and type in California Haunts Radio, and there we are. I have 3 levels of membership. The first level comes with some goodies, where of course you get to see the shows every week, which is what we're doing now. But I've decided to take the calendar from the loyal listeners program and put it over on Patreon. So those who join at that $5 level will get the calendar at the first of the month to know who's going to be on. So you'll know ahead of time. I'm also going to give key rings out to people that are at the $5 level, and I'm also giving a California Haunts logo sticker to people at $5 level. Next level is a $10 level, and we're looking at all those items. Plus, you're going to get exclusive access to any show that's pre-recorded. So if I do a show like Friday, I'm going to pre-record a show that I'm going to release around on the 17th. Well, if I pre-record a show on that Friday, I'm going to I will post it to the Patreon 4 or 5 days beforehand so you guys can see it. Okay, that's for those members, and that also includes that stuff from the first level. Now the next level is a little pricey, but I think you're going to like it. It's a $40 level on Patreon, but you're going to get all the above. Plus, once a month, I'm going to sit down with you guys. Okay, there's 2 pluses here. Once a month, I'm going to sit down with you guys for a one-on-one. You can ask me anything you want about ghost hunting, anything you want about any guests that we've had on, any topic, any paranormal topic. If I don't have the answer, I'll find it for you. Plus, like on this show, Kathleen has written several books, okay? If there's a particular book that you're interested in from a show, all right, you let me know, and at that $40 level, I will provide you the book from Amazon. I'll get you the book. 1 book a month from a guest, okay? And that's included in your $40 a month, membership, okay? You'll get 1 book, plus everything else. So that's what I've done. That's what I've set up, and that's going to help support what I do, and get better and better guests, and can keep this thing on the air for as long as possible, for eternity, or whatever. But go ahead and check out our Patreon. Become a member over there if you feel up to it. I'm not going to hold a gun to your heads, but That's just how it is. We're all self-funded. And the Patreon will be kind of fun. In fact, I'll be adding stuff. I mean, there may be something I'm using during a show. Maybe I could put some cool sunglasses on or something during a show, and I could add that into something. I'll even take suggestions for guests over there. Whatever works. But anyway, check out our Patreon. So that's going to be happening. I'm going to be doing an Ask the Ghost Hunter here probably at some point towards the end of the month. And you guys can come on and ask me questions and whatnot. I'm setting that up through Nextdoor. And that'll probably be a Zoom thing, but you guys can come on and ask me questions about stuff. Anyway, this was fun. It was great. And my guest on Wednesday is going to be very interesting. He is into Nordic mysticism. And he just might do some readings. He kind of offered to do them, so we'll see if he follows through with it. But he's going to be talking about that and talk about some of that Nordic mysticism and how he uses that to help people improve their lives and whatnot. So come on Wednesday, same time, same place. Anyway, I'm going to show you Betty's books here and a link to get them. Make sure I got everything. Yeah, okay, everything's here. And if you want to, if you do want to get Betty's books, so here we go. Okay, well, it was great to spend this hour with you, a little more than an hour. But I get to go now and take a ride in my car that has air conditioning and kind of sitting there for a while and get a soda or something while I'm out. But thank you guys for coming, and I will see you on Wednesday. And again, please check out our Patreon. Please let people know about this show. Share it with 5 people. We're trying to build up the audience on here, get some sponsors, and get stuff going. And if you find it in your heart to even donate $5 via the PayPal account, please do that for us. I appreciate you guys coming, and you guys have a good next couple days, and I will see you on Wednesday.